Managerial accounting is a much easier transition than if you were in public accounting. Because public accounting, for the most part, especially if you're working in audit, you're thinking more about reporting on history. If you're in managerial accounting, you're already doing more operational analysis, looking at variable costs and all kinds of different things that have a lot more to do with the operations of the business versus just reporting on the accuracy of financial statements.
John Sanchez spent over 20 years working FP&A roles at companies including Arby's, AutoNation, and Royal Caribbean Cruises. He then started FPA Group, which provides FP&A consulting and training to FP&A, finance, and accounting professionals. John helps people understand how to communicate effectively with people from any culture or background in person or remotely. So, John, I have a quick question for you to start off the show. You've transitioned from traditional accounting and finance roles into a specialized consulting role with a focus on communication. What motivated this shift, and what were some of the initial challenges you faced in making this big transition?
So it's kind of a couple of things. So I would say there was one sort of aha moment, but everything didn't change as a result of that. That kind of triggered some self-reflection. So long time ago, way back in the day, I was working at AutoNation. I was a manager of corporate development. I did M&A stuff. And I was out at a happy hour with a bunch of people from the company. And I was talking to a couple of people from accounting. Now, at that time, I worked in corporate development, so more of a finance role. So I'd not met these people before. We get into a conversation. And long story short, one of them, I said something and one of them laughed. And they said, you actually seem like a nice guy. And the way they said it made me think, they said that like they were surprised. And I asked about it. They basically told me that they had said hello to me multiple times, passing me in the hallway at work, and I never even acknowledged them. So I quickly changed the subject. I felt uncomfortable, a little bit embarrassed. And when I reflected on it, I realized that my job for me was very stressful. And I was always, if I was going to a meeting, I was walking down the hall like this, looking at some report we were going to discuss. And it was usually VPs, senior VPs, people on the board of directors, and I was still in my 20s. So it made me realize I always felt like I was a people person, but I realized my awareness was just not there. I didn't realize how I was coming across to other people. And so it kind of got me onto a personal development path. And it was really sort of a long distance between that one aha moment. And then fast forward to about 2013, I think it was. And I was asked to speak at a budget and forecast conference. And I thought, well, how does this speaking thing work? What do you mean? So they basically said, look, we're going to pay you some money to come speak for an hour in front of a group full of people. When they described them, those were prime candidates for the consulting work I was doing at the time. CFOs, controllers, FP&A directors, and I was doing FP&A consulting work. When I did that speaking engagement, training, whatever you want to call it, I realized I really enjoyed that. I got bit by the bug. So between then and today, I kind of transitioned from all FP&A consulting and a little bit of speaking and training to where now I do mostly speaking and training and a little bit of FP&A consulting. Long answer, but I wanted to give you some context because most people find it odd that I now make a living talking because that seems kind of like the polar opposite of accounting.
Right.
Or FP&A where we're in, spreadsheets all the time.
No, I appreciate you sharing a bit of like how that happened because, yeah, it is true. People will wonder how did that transition happen. So now we have a better understanding of you went from just jumping into an experience of public speaking and really enjoying it to now mostly doing communication work and public speaking work and a little bit of FP&A. Does your training involve or revolve around accounting and finance professionals only, or it goes beyond that?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I always say most of what I teach could benefit anyone, but I kind of learned the hard way the more I got into this, that when you tell people that something is for everyone or anyone, people kind of tune out because they can't really identify with that. If I say something like, well, this is tailored to FP&A professionals, and then I give them an example of how it is, then it tends to click a lot more. So
you emphasize a lot on communication and also emotional intelligence in FP&A. Could you share how these soft skills impact effectiveness and financial planning analysis within large organizations?
Yeah, so I think the biggest area is in gaining trust and getting buy-in. So maybe think of an example. I used to work in FP&A at Royal Caribbean Cruises. And the way we had it set up, we had, I think, 4 or 5 analysts, and each one of us had about 4 or 5 different departments. And we did the budget, we did the forecast, variance analysis. We were basically like their finance person within the organization, their business partner, for sake of a better term. And I handled all the capital appropriations requests. So if somebody wanted money and it was capital, they had to present it to me, and then I would put it in a certain format, do some analysis, and present it to the CFO. And what I realized quickly is they saw me kind of like people see auditors as the bad guy, as the guy who's trying to say no to their project. Because a lot of those projects were not approved because they didn't really have a good business case for them. And so I realized that the more I was able to connect with those people on a personal level and build some trust, then they saw me more like as an ally than as someone that was trying to stop them from getting the money for their project. And so I think once you build that trust in a situation like that, it goes a long way. And then also, if you're doing a budget and you go back, prime example, I had to go to our senior VP of sales. I was a 23-year-old financial analyst, and I had to tell him that the CFO said, we're cutting your budget by 5%.
Wow.
And I'm just a messenger. If I have no rapport with them, that's going to be a really difficult conversation. So the more you can build that relationship, build that trust, and get them to feel like, hey, we're on the same team here. We have the same goal. We're just trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of how do we make this work. That's a much easier conversation than them feeling like it's like a combative type of thing.
To build trust, like you mentioned, does that require spending time outside of work, or does that build within the organization?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly doesn't hurt. If you, go out to some lunches or some happy hours, that is beneficial. I look at it this way. So I read a book years ago, Never Split the Difference. And it was written by this guy named Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator. And he talks about this concept. He calls it tactical empathy. And he differentiates that from emotional empathy in the sense that I don't necessarily need to make friends or be best friends with this person in order to work with them, because he used to work with terrorists trying to get hostages out. So what it requires is that the other person understands that you know where they're coming from, you understand what they're trying to get in this situation and why they're trying to get it. And to the extent that you can communicate that to them and they feel comfortable that this guy gets me, that's pretty much all you need. All the other stuff from there, if you become friends on top of that, that's cool. But that's kind of icing on the cake. It's not really necessary for the business part of things.
That's such good advice, especially for young professionals coming up, where there's a misconception that they need to be best friends with their coworkers in order to have a cohesive team. But I love the perspective you've brought in, that is icing on the cake. It's more about tactical, what was the term you used? Tactical empathy?
Tactical empathy. Yeah, that's what Chris Voss calls it. Psychologists call it cognitive empathy, but it's same concept.
Gotcha. Very good. In terms of business storytelling, this ties in with communication, obviously, and especially in accounting and finance, we're not known to be good storytellers. What is a powerful tool that you think could benefit accounting finance pros to develop this skill set in storytelling with numbers?
So I think one of the mistakes that I see over and over again, and I did this myself, right? So I'm not trying to make myself out to be any better than anyone else. I just have a little bit more experience at it in doing it the wrong way and then kind of figuring it out. So one of the things that I see that we do a lot is we bury the lead, right? What journalists call burying the lead.
What does that mean?
Meaning we start out with all of the analysis to build up to whatever the insight is that we're presenting or the recommendation is that we're going to make. And the entire time, the people we're presenting to are thinking, where's he going with this? Right? They don't have any perspective or context on where you're going. So the first thing, and this is all based on this thing called the Minto Pyramid Principle. Goes back to a woman named Barbara Minto. She was a consultant with McKinsey and Company back in the day. And she kind of introduced this whole structure. And the whole idea is start out with the end in mind. So if we're, for example, going into a meeting where we're going to present some recommendation. We think we should allocate X amount of dollars to purchase this new software tool for all these different reasons. Don't come in and say, we did this analysis and this analysis and this analysis, put up a bunch of charts and graphs before you come in and say, what we're here for today is we want to present our case for moving forward with approving X dollars for this purpose. Then you present the high level, here's why, and then you can start going into the details. And I always use an analogy. Think about yourself like a lawyer going into a courtroom. You want to think through every possible question that someone might ask and be prepared, but you're not going to go in there and throw up all those scenarios. So you want to start at the highest level and then build your support for that, and then make sure that you're prepared so that when people ask further drill down questions, that you're prepared to go into whatever detail.
That's such a great way. Yeah, that is fantastic. It reminds me of a public speaking technique. You probably you know this very well because this is your area of expertise as well. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, kind of thing, right? So it kind of preps them mentally as to what the messaging is going to be, and if there are questions, you have supporting information to provide if needed.
Yeah, what you just hit on, the tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, that taps into what psychologists call primacy and recency, right? We tend to remember the first and the last thing that we hear or we experience, which is why that sort of framework has become very popular, and it works. It's very effective in all kinds of communication, not just a presentation to a group.
That is very true. It's about how you make people feel also, right? In addition, it ties in with that as well. Like they'll leave with the impression of how you made them feel last, or what they heard last from you. When it comes to storytelling with data, do you rely on charts and graphs, or how do you go about it to make an effective presentation?
So there's a couple of things. So one of the things that I see a lot is the TMI issue, right? How many times have you been to some kind of a presentation and somebody literally says, they'll turn around, they'll point to a PowerPoint, or if it's on Zoom, they'll point to the PowerPoint and they'll say, I know you can't read the slide, but
dude, so many times.
If you know I can't read the slide, why did you put all that information on the slide? So a lot of times we put too much on the slide because I think a lot of us have a lot of experience more with reports than with presenting something like in either in a Zoom or on a PowerPoint.
Very good point.
The other thing that I think people miss out on is, especially if you're doing it virtually, I see people all the time, they'll go from a situation like this. You and I are both on camera. We have our microphones live. We're talking to each other. We're making eye contact with each other. And then I start presenting and I put up my slide, and now I'm either not seen at all or I'm this little dot up in the corner. And what people don't realize is it's at a subconscious level. No one's going to raise their hand and go, hey, I feel disconnected. But psychologically at a subconscious level, that feels a little bit disconnected because that's not what it would look like if we were face to face, right? There's all kinds of things you can do in a virtual environment to kind of mitigate some of those downsides. So first of all, less information on the slides, bigger fonts, less information, choosing the right type of a visualization. So I see people sometimes using a pie chart and it doesn't really make the point that they're trying to make. And whatever visualization that you use, it should be able to make the point without you having to say a whole lot. To me, that's kind of a good litmus test for a visualization. You're there to explain it, to add context, and to answer questions. But when you leave, they're still going to have that deck. And so I always try to shoot for having it have the ability to stand on its own as much as possible. And then think about story as you're putting together the visuals. So what's the story I'm trying to tell? Do I need approval for a project? Am I looking for money? Am I looking to explain something? Am I trying to convince someone, right? If I'm only there to inform, a quarterly flash. My whole purpose is just to give you information. Great. Very, very simple format. But if I'm there to persuade, I'm probably going to use visuals a lot less, and I'm going to just use them to make the specific points that only a visual like a graph can make. And then I'm going to stay in front of those people and talk to them person to person more than just using the visuals.
That's such good information. So someone who is new to this type of data visualization storytelling, and they're wondering, okay, John, this sounds great. Where would I go to learn all these skills? Where would you send them to?
Well, it's going to sound self-promoting, but I have a data visualization course that I teach.
That's great.
There's a book called, it's by Cole Nussbaumer. I don't have the physical book itself. I have it on Kindle, but the author's name is Cole Nussbaumer, and it's storytelling with data. To me, of all the books that I've seen so far, that is head and shoulders above the rest in very direct, tactical. It's not a bunch of theory. It's very, very tactical. Do this, do this, do this, do this. If this is your situation, here's 3 of your best options, and here's why. And here's some of the decision-making criteria to help you decide between those.
Sounds like a very helpful book.
Also, anything by this guy, Edward Tufte. He's got a bunch of books. Visual Explanations is probably one of the best known ones. He's considered by some people kind of the godfather of data visualization. He has a lot of real world examples in there where he'll tell a story in a narrative format, and then he shows visuals to go along with it and kind of explains why that specific visual was chosen.
Those two seem like great resources. We'll link them out in the show notes for those who like to read books and learn in that manner. But for people who want to learn from a course, tell us more about yours, John. I'm also curious to know more about what you cover in that course. What will people walk away? What kind of skills they'll walk away with after they complete it, and how long it takes to complete it as well.
Sure. So the main course that I have is just a 1-hour course. It's a kind of a high level, wave top type of a course. And it starts out teaching basically the 6 Gestalt principles of data visualization. So simple things like contrast, how to use contrast, how to use the idea of positive and negative space. So when you're creating reports, just by using these 6 basic principles of data visualization, it all has to do really, really basically with how our eye processes information and the things that at a subconscious level we connect dots with. So for example, if you see a bunch of dots that are close together and then a bunch of dots that are further apart, our brain automatically assumes that the dots that are closer together, they're a group somehow. They're somehow related.
Yep, that's correct.
Right? So there's a bunch of these principles that once you learn the basic principles, you can start applying those even to existing presentations you might have to kind of kick them up to the next level. And if you're using purpose-built data visualization tools, at that point, those concepts become a little less important because most of those are baked in to all of the templates that would be in those tools. Even in PowerPoint, a lot of those things are baked in.
Okay, so someone could start off with PowerPoint. Is there another tool that is your favorite besides PowerPoint that we can point people to?
I'm a big fan of Tableau. It's pretty easy to use. I've got an example I use in one of my courses of a visualization I created in less than a half an hour from downloading Tableau, having never seen it before in my life, importing the data, doing all the ETL, getting it into the right format, and then producing a nice graph that the client looked at and went, wow, that's way easier to draw conclusions from than the reports that we had before.
Wow, that's great. I mean, at the end of the day, any visual presentation of data, the end goal is to walk away with insights to be able to make good decisions from it, right? Doesn't matter what the tool is, but if there's one out there like Tableau, for example, that makes things easier, is definitely a win. And also PowerPoint for those who want to jump into it and kind of dive into and learn. Get John's course, get those tools, and practice. I think with any skill set, repetition is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to get the reps in.
Definitely. So, John, as a certified visual presenter, what are your top tips for professionals having to communicate complex financial information that is effectively in a virtual setting? What would you recommend?
The first thing that I would think about is, regardless of whether it's complex information or not, there are some basics everyone can do that to me are like the cost of entry. And they cost next to nothing, and they're very simple to do. So one simple example, hopefully people are picking up on the fact that when I'm talking to you, my eye line is pretty closely aligned with yours, right? And what I see a lot is people looking down because they're using a laptop. Okay. I happen to have a particular setup here that's different from what I would recommend for most people, but I like to start with something that doesn't cost a lot. It doesn't take a lot. You could literally get an Amazon box and just put your laptop on top of it. But the whole idea is to get the camera as close to your eye line so it's a straight line as possible. The whole idea that we're trying to go for here is make it as much as possible like we're in the same room face to face. The next thing would be just have a good microphone. You don't have to spend a ton of money, right? There's tons of them out there that are under $100. The next thing would be have a clean background so people are not distracted. Okay, so now we got the basics. We're making some eye contact. People can hear us clearly. The next thing would be there's a feature in PowerPoint called Cameo. I had never heard of it until I took this course where I got that certification. And it basically allows you to insert a video of you live into your PowerPoint. And you can manipulate it, put it wherever you want, so that when you're presenting, you're not just a little box in a square like you see in most presentations. So I could take up half the slide and have the other slide be what I'm presenting. I can manipulate it any way that I want. And what that's doing is that's, number one, hopefully I've taken some time and I've built some trust before I transition into presenting a bunch of slides or graphs. And a lot of that then gets lost if I'm not on the camera anymore, right? Because I'm not making that human to human connection. I think we tend to forget that even though we're presenting technical information and data, and we mostly work with people who are left brain logical, we're still all human beings. And we're still all wired the same way when it comes to reacting to certain things. And then it goes back to some of the things that I said before. Less on the slide, less words, bigger visuals, being very careful about how you choose those visuals so that they're able to stand on their own as much as possible. Because we're here right now and I can answer any questions, but they're going to be left with that deck. And you don't want something where they look at it and go, what was the point that he was trying to make here? So those would be kind of some of the starting points that I would look at.
Great starting points. This is becoming a presentation on visualization crash course. This is great, John. Great, amazing information. So for people who are interested in learning more about this certified virtual presenter, where did you obtain the certification and where people can go and look into it more if they want to choose that path as well?
The organization that offers it is called eSpeakers. And they have, so there's two different certifications. One is sort of the basic level certified virtual presenter, and then the virtual master presenter, which I completed I think it was October or November. That one is much more of a deep dive into all of the nuts and bolts. You start out with the simple things like we just talked about, like getting your lighting and your audio and all that. And then it gets in a little deeper into slide design, how to use different features to keep people engaged, right? So one of the biggest ways to keep people engaged is with novelty, right? Just something different. And there's a ton of different ways. I've got stuff all around me that I could show you if you want to go there. Examples that when I show it, it just gets people's attention, not because it's fantastic or anything. It's just different from what they're used to seeing.
I'm curious. Do you have maybe one or two examples handy close by that we could take a look?
Sure. Yeah. Let me find my favorite. So when we talk about communication in general, I talk a lot about the platinum rule, right? So most people have heard the golden rule: do unto others as you would like done unto yourself. The platinum rule says, let's take it one step further. Let's give them communication the way they want it. You might like chicken, I might like steak, right? It's just a preference thing, right? So I don't want to give you steak because I like it. I want to give you what you want. So I talk about, we wear a lot of different hats, especially in FP&A. So if I'm in FP&A, I'm walking around all day typically, and I'm wearing my FP&A hat. And if I'm talking to my buddies in FP&A, we can talk about EBITDA and trailing 12 months and CAGR and, all this lingo that we talk about. But if I go down the hall and I go talk to the sales department and I start throwing that lingo around, they don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So we have to start to think about people like, what hat are they wearing, right? Where are they coming from? What language do they speak? And I don't mean like, do they speak English or Spanish? Do they speak finance? Are they a non-finance person? right? So if they're not, then we need to adjust how we're communicating with those people. Something as simple as these hats is just a visual metaphor, right? People are, you giggled a little bit, right? I get the same response most of the time. I have a t-shirt that I sometimes wear when I do big presentations. I wear it under my dress shirt. And at some point, I'll take off my shirt and people start thinking, what is he doing, taking off his shirt? And the shirt says, my budget is bigger than yours, right? It's just a goofy, funny little thing. I always have people come up to me, hey, where can I get one of those? It's novelty. That's all it is, right? It jars people just enough to get them out of that. They're just like in this state where they're just kind of on autopilot, and it jars their state, as Tony Robbins would say.
Mm-hmm. It's a pattern interrupt, I think. That's another term for it.
Exactly.
Great. Those are great examples, John. Thank you. That drives the point home 100%.
I'm a big fan of showing rather than telling.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. Especially with data visualization presentations, that's the key. Tell us a little bit about your FP&A Track podcast. I know we talked a little bit before recording. You've launched it in January. Who is it for? What type of content are you producing in this new podcast of yours?
Yeah, so it's for FP&A professionals. That's my background. I started out in public accounting, then I moved into FP&A, and I really loved it. And what I still see out there are other podcasts out there for finance people, but most of them tend to focus on whatever the host is best at, right? So if they're a data visualization person, they talk a lot about that. Or if they have a particular niche, they tend to focus a little bit on that. My niche is only one piece of the skill set that you should have if you want to be very successful in FP&A. So what I do is I try to get some of the top people, the top experts and thought leaders in FP&A, bring them on the podcast and get the benefit of their wisdom on things like, what are the skills that you think someone needs to have to excel in FP&A? How does, common questions people ask, if I'm in a different area like general finance, or maybe I'm in accounting, how would I transition into FP&A? How would I go about doing that? And so I try to be a little bit of like a reporter or a curator to bring on the best people and sort of pull those things out of them and share that through the podcast.
People watching this or listening to this episode are wondering, but okay, then how do I transition to FP&A? So for management accountants, what do you see? What's the path if someone wants to go from managerial accounting into FP&A?
So I think actually managerial accounting is a much easier transition than if you were in public accounting, right? Because public accounting, for the most part, especially if you're working in audit, you're thinking more about reporting on history, right? If you're in managerial accounting, you're already doing more operational analysis, looking at variable costs and all kinds of different things that have a lot more to do with the operations of the business on an ongoing basis versus just reporting on the accuracy of financial statements. I went from public accounting to M&A. And so for me, that transition was because the thought process of the people that were hiring for that job was M&A involves a lot of due diligence. Auditing skills are very similar to what you need for due diligence. Then from M&A, I made the transition into FP&A because in M&A, everything we did doing valuations was financial projections, forecast, same basic, rudimentary skills that are involved there. So I would focus on the basic skills that you need in FP&A, budgeting, forecasting, financial analysis, developing insights, presenting those insights, capital analysis, maybe a little bit if you have the ability to dabble a little bit in acquisition, because in my experience, if the organization's not big enough to have a dedicated M&A department, FP&A is probably who they're going to tap if they have an acquisition to say, hey, we're putting together like an acquisition team, and they'll kind of take people, maybe somebody from FP&A, somebody from financial reporting, someone from tax, someone from legal. And if you want to be on that team, that's one of those skills that you might want to think about developing. And then networking. That's the other thing.
Networking. Oh, right. To be able to find opportunities in FP&A. How far back have you seen FP&A branching out into its own division within a large organization? Obviously, smaller companies don't have an FP&A track specifically, but larger multinational companies do have it that is quite different than management accounting, than finance. So at which point do you see the split off?
Yeah, it's hard to say because when I was in FP&A at Royal Caribbean, for example, I call it FP&A, but back then we just called it planning. So FP&A as its own discipline, in the grand scheme of things, if you compare it to like the CMA certification or the CPA, FP&A is very new. So the Association for Financial Professionals, who offers the FP&A certified professional, that was only developed, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. Some maybe a little bit more, but within the last 10 years, right? They hired me to do the first prep course for that exam. So I know it's been within the last 10 years that I've been working with them. So it's very, very new. I think it depends not just on the size of the company, but on the complexity of what they need to do in their planning process. So for example, if you have a company that's been around for 100 years and it's not very capital intensive, they don't have a lot of costs that vary based on outside things that they can't control, and year over year the planning is pretty simple, you may not need to have a whole staff of dedicated FP&A professionals. But I would say enterprise level companies for sure are going to have FP&A teams. I work with them all the time doing training. But then you have teams where they start FP&A, kind of like I was describing the M&A side of things. They might start out where they don't have an FP&A team yet, and it develops by saying, okay, what are the skill sets that we're looking for? Well, we probably want someone that's really strong in financial reporting. We probably want someone that's really strong in building models. Want someone maybe that has some experience with rolling forecasters. That they'll look at what are the specific skill sets that we need for FP&A in our organization, because it's going to vary from organization to organization, right? I mentioned rolling forecasts. Not everybody uses those. Maybe completely irrelevant for company A, very relevant for company B. But I would say, for sure, the bigger companies are going to be much more likely to have dedicated FP&A teams. And, like when I was at Royal Caribbean, this is a long time ago, and we had a team of 6 or 7 people, right? I've trained teams as big as 20 plus in FP&A.
Is there a specific degree, whether it's finance or accounting, that is best suited for FP&A? Or is it just one of...
Dude, this is an age-old argument.
What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are, I'm going to be controversial here. I have always looked at accounting, and this is just for me personally, obviously. I've always looked at accounting as more technically rigorous than any of the other disciplines in finance. So if you think about like in college, when I was looking at degrees, accounting, finance, marketing, management, I looked at those and I said, well, I'm not sure what I really want to do. I want to do something in business. Accounting seems like it's the most rigorous, and accountants have to know about finance. Finance people have to know a little bit about accounting, but not that much. So if I had to choose, I would probably go accounting because it gives you a little broader base, I think. You're going to have to learn about cost accounting. That's going to give you exposure to a lot of different areas of management accounting. You're going to have to learn about tax. All that stuff is going to come into play if you get into FP&A. If you're strictly a finance major, maybe not, depending on, how you set up your electives and the different courses that you took. And then if you want to get an MBA, you can always kind of shift the specialization, right? So maybe you have a bachelor's in accounting and you get your MBA and you specialize more in finance, right? Or whatever area, you think at. It depends on if you're looking to create an opportunity for yourself in FP&A or if you're already in FP&A and you're just looking to get better within that same organization.
Gotcha. I appreciate you've been in FP&A for so long, so I appreciate your perspective, even if it's a little controversial. Controversy is good. So thank you for sharing that. Now let's bring it back into the FP&A and communication skills. Let's piece those two together. At which point in an FP&A career, obviously communication skills is important no matter where you are in an organization, but it becomes more critical as people start moving up. at which point would you say someone should really invest in a communications coach, learning about storytelling, everything we talked about today in an FP&A track?
I would say as soon as you're starting to supervise other people, you need to start thinking about it. You may not necessarily have to go join Toastmasters and start networking and, taking a bunch of courses, but you need to start thinking about, do I want to be on a leadership path, or am I more of a technician where I just want to be more of a taskmaster and a doer? If you have any ambition at all to be on any kind of leadership path, I would say by the time you get to a manager level, you need to start getting better and better at these communication skills. Because if you think about it, as you start going, so let's take it at the entry level.
Mm-hmm.
Entry level in any type of a job, you're a taskmaster.
Mm-hmm.
You have a task to do. You're not supervising anybody else. You're not responsible for anybody else. Just do your job, right? So as long as you get along with your boss, that's all you need to worry about. As soon as you start supervising people, now you're splitting time between doing your own tasks and managing other people, supervising other people. Now we have to start building relationships. We have to have rapport with people. We have to build trust with people. People have to know that we have their back, that we're on the same team. And these are all communication skills. And the higher up you get, if you look at any organization, the CFO is not sitting there in Excel all day, right? They're in meetings all the time. What are they doing in meetings? They're listening and they're talking. They're communicating.
Very, very good. How long do you think, obviously it would vary by industry, company size, and so many other factors, but in a general standpoint, how long would it take someone to go from a entry-level FP&A to a leadership role in FP&A? What does that look like usually in terms of time?
I guess in today's environment, I've seen people manager within 4 to 5 years, director within a couple of years of that, if you're on the fast track. That's kind of what I focus on with the FP&A fast track. And so on the podcast, we just kind of talk like we're talking now, and we talk about different topics that I hope will serve the audience, right? But like with my newsletter and the courses that I do, I try to focus, think about the 80-20 rule. What's 20% of those skills that's going to give you 80% of the benefit in advancing your career, which is part of the reason that I focus so much on communication, because I believe the technical skills are what get you in the door. The communication and the people skills are what keep you there, what get you raises, promotions, and get on the cool projects.
That is so true. Soft skills is not focus. There should be a big focus on soft skills for accounting and finance professionals, going back to college time, right? Taking courses on that. But unfortunately, there isn't. But that's something that is learned on the job, the training, and people just wanting to improve and really get to those leadership roles, and seeing the communication and soft skills are very, very important. John, where can people learn more about you, follow your work, learn about your courses, and any other information you would like to share today?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I post on LinkedIn pretty much every day, and it's actually really the only social media that I do at all. That and my website, which is the FPAgroup.com. But those are the two best places.
Excellent. We'll drop links to your LinkedIn profile, to your website, also to your podcast show in the show notes. So everybody who wants to learn about FP&A, communication skills, follow John's work. We'll have links in the show notes for everybody to go check out those resources. John, thank you so much for being here on the Flow podcast today, sharing your knowledge, your skills, and your expertise and your insights in all that is FP&A and communication. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, man.